Hi guys, welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to be determining and trying to figure out what my favorite controller is. So I have 5 that I'm going to be looking at, starting with the Super Nintendo controller, and then the Nintendo 64 controller, which is, I need to unwrap it, and the GameCube controller, and the Wii Remote, and Nunchuck, and then come on, this baby. So, without further ado, I also don't know why the right side did not sync up. I guess just the Switch isn't on right now. So anyway, guys, I'm going to start with the Super Nintendo controller. I'm going to explain what I like and dislike about each of these controllers. Now, I'm using the Last Velocity Super Nintendo Classic variant of this controller. I'm going to unplug it just real quick, just so I can kind of look at it. So the things I dislike about this controller, first of all, I actually dislike a lot of things about this controller. So I know a lot of people really like this controller, but I am not one of them. Now, this controller was absolutely revolutionary. I know this didn't have an analog stick, but this is like the beginning of what modern controllers were. So absolutely, this controller is revolutionary. And it's not bad by any means. But playing with it today, for the record, I don't have an NES controller. So anyway, I imagine this is more comfortable to hold than the NES controller, because the NES controller is very blocky from what I've seen. So anyway, this controller, Super Nintendo controller, the cord is, at least on the Classic Edition, I don't know about the original one, but the cord is way too short. My problems with the controller start with it feels very light. It doesn't feel weighty. There's like no weight to it. Whereas a lot of these other controllers feel like they have some weight to them, like this. Even this is light, but it's a lot more flexible. Like this controller right here feels like it has a lot of weight to it. You know what I mean? And I like that. So this controller feels very light and not weighty. Again, I'm not sure if the original build of this controller is any different in that regard, but this controller feels very light and not weighty enough. And I personally don't like controllers that feel this way. Now, also, I understand why this isn't. The glossy version is probably a bit better because it's easier to grip, so I understand that. The shoulder buttons are fine, obviously revolutionary at the time. They are nice and clicky, which is something I like. Now, start and select buttons are way too mushy for my taste. I do not like these at all. These buttons are gross. Now, in terms of the D-pad, honestly, I can't really say I'm that big of a fan. And considering there's no analog stick on this controller, and the D-pad is solely what you're going to be using, that is a big turnoff for me. Yeah, I mean, I'll absolutely use this with my SNES Classic. It's not that I won't use this one, but I just find it to be kind of awkward. But the buttons, holy shit, these buttons are beautiful. These face buttons feel so smooth. They're so clicky, even though I do wish they were a bit more clicky. And the grooves in these buttons are designed for you to rest your hand like this. It's so intuitive. It's probably my favorite part of the controller. Again, not saying the D-pad is bad, although it's kinda not the best ever, in my opinion. So the D-pad is fine, it's competent, I guess. But it just doesn't feel clicky enough. The D-pad should be clicky. Like, I'm pressing it, it's not clicking. So, all in all, I mean, I'd give it like a 3 out of 5. It's functional, it's relatively comfortable. That's the other thing, it's also a bit small for my hands. It's just kind of small. So now I'm going to move on to N64. So the N64 and GameCube, I'm going to kind of talk about them together because the GameCube was kind of the direct successor to the N64. And I feel like I've used the N64 one more than the GameCube one, but that's only because I have more games that are compatible with it or have played with it. So anyway, the N64 controller, this one, the cord is a great length for what I need. I will say about this controller, it is very dusty. I need to, because it's black, it gets very dusty. N64 controller is pretty comfortable the way it molds of your hand really well. I like these grips. I like these grips a lot. I think like you can hold it pretty tight without it getting, it doesn't feel cheap or plasticky, you know what I mean? I mean, it's plastic, but it doesn't feel like, so I really like holding this. It feels really good to hold. Now, my thumb is fucking huge, what the fuck? Anyway, about this controller, the design is a bit odd. I understand if you're playing a 2D game, you would hold it like this, which you would have the D-pad, which makes sense. And then L and R shoulder buttons here, and then face buttons. That would make sense. This D-pad is actually really good. It's really clicky, but I'm not sure if I've ever used a game. I'm not sure if I've ever played a game on the N64 that actually used the D-pad. So, again, kind of weird. Now, the controller itself, start button is fine. I like that you can actually feel the word start on it. The analog stick isn't the best. This stick is kind of bad. This stick does feel cheap and plasticky. You can see mine is pretty old. You can see, yeah. So anyway, the thing about the sticks on these is that they don't always work great. Like, they're just a little bit loose or just feel weird. Because I have a couple more backups here. This one stick is just straight up way loose. So anyway, yeah, this controller is pretty comfortable. Again, I've only ever really played it in this configuration because of 3D. I've played it like, hold it this way, and when you hold it this way, it's pretty comfortable because the Z button is on the back here, so I'm very lucky, I'm very glad that they mapped actions like long jumping in Mario 64 or like Z targeting in Ocarina of Time. I'm very glad they mapped those actions to this Z button on the back, because without that, those are actions that would normally be mapped to the L trigger. And I must say, who on earth is going to use this L trigger while holding the controller in this configuration? Like, there's no way you're going to get to this L trigger. The R trigger is fine, it feels okay. The face buttons are really nice and clicky. I like these. They're just... I like these. And then, same with the camera buttons. All these buttons are really nice and clicky. I do wish it had a second analog stick for camera, but this analog stick, as cheap as it feels, it does feel fine to use. It works. I've never really had too many issues with it. So, not my favorite analog stick, but still decent. Again, really nice D-pad, but I never use it. GameCube controller. Basically, this is a better version of the N64 controller, I want to say, but it still has some weird design quirks, too. This GameCube controller basically got rid of the whole three-prong thing, so you just hold it this way, and there's no Z trigger on the back anymore. You would do saw map to the L trigger. Now, we need to get the good out of the way. These shoulder buttons are probably the most satisfying thing in the world. I think these shoulder buttons are more satisfying than the SNES controller's face buttons, and that's saying something. I love how they have analog triggers, and then you just press it down. Ah, it feels so good. So, the start button is kind of cheap feeling. Now, this controller has a much better stick than the N64 one, because the N64 one has this little knob, and it's kind of skinny and kind of easy to break, and this one is more of a modern stick, and it feels very fluid in movement. The N64 one feels kind of stiff. You have to like rotate it, whereas this one feels very fluid. Now, I do really like the way the stick feels. Although, I like the N64 stick, it being a little stiffer, but it's just a little bit different. This stick is really loose, but that's a good thing. And then here are these buttons, again, super clicky. Now, kind of an odd button layout. I do kind of wonder why the B button is below the A button. I kind of wish it was above it. Now, because traditionally, you would have, like, A and X, you would have it like this kind of layout. But here, no, the B button is below this. And A is your primary button, so things like fire get mapped to A. So I was playing Mega Man on a GameCube controller, which means I had to rest my thumb like this. And it was a little bit awkward. So, I'm just saying that. But anyway, again, not sure why there's only one Z button here. There should be a second Z button. That seems inconsistent. Ivo City, I don't like that. But overall, this controller is great. The C stick is pretty good. This is way better than the N64 C buttons for most games. And I must say, although the C buttons are great for something like Ocarina of Time, why couldn't they map buttons to the D-pad for Ocarina of Time on GameCube or Wii U or whatever you're playing it on that's not N64? They should have mapped inventory to the D-pad. Doing it with a stick is just awkward. Anyway, that's not the point. Speaking of the D-pad, this D-pad is so tiny, and it's about the same size, actually, of the Wii Remote D-pad, which I'll be getting to in a minute. But the Wii Remote is designed so differently that it feels a little bit better. This D-pad is so awkward. It's down here. For instance, the N64 D-pad was just to the left, which is awkward in its own right, but you could basically hold it like a digital controller or hold it like a modern controller. This, you can only hold it like a modern controller, and in order to use the D-pad, you just have to go down here. It's a very small D-pad and doesn't feel very comfortable to use. Now, I would say this D-pad is way better than this D-pad, but this analog stick is better than this analog stick. But I will say, I think overall this controller is better because let's face it, I don't use the D-pad, like, ever. So, another reason to not really have feelings about the D-pad. Now, moving on to the Wii Remote. So, this baby, I'm gonna do it first without the nunchuck, is weird. This is a weird, unconventional controller. So there's a couple, just like with the Joy-Cons, there's a couple control schemes for this. So most games that play in 2D or a classic control scheme would hold this on its side. So if you hold this on its side, you would hold it like that. There's no shoulder buttons on this, which is interesting. This does have a B button on the back. It has a back trigger like the N64 controller. Now this is an odd thing. Also, this back trigger feels really satisfying to push. This is an odd thing, I'm going to say. Having back triggers isn't really that conventional, because most controllers have triggers on the top, and most controllers don't have triggers on the back. But I've always really liked controllers that have triggers on the back. It just feels fluid to be able to press something while pressing the button on the front. That's just me. I know a lot of people don't like these, a lot of people don't like this, a lot of people don't like the N64 one, but I always really liked, I like the sleek glossy feel of the Wii Remote. It doesn't feel ungrippable. If you hold it this way, it's about the right size. It does kind of look like an elongated bar of soap, but I do have to admit, honestly, as small as the D-pad is, I think it feels pretty good, and these plus and minus buttons are not intrusive and they don't get in the way, but they are still usable if you need them. Home button is the same case. The A button is pretty big, and whatever playing on its side 1 and 2 work as face buttons, it works pretty well. It's incredibly simple for what it is. Now, if you attach it to the nunchuck, on the other hand, this might be one of my favorite controllers. Now, it's gonna sound super weird, but I love this. Now, when you're playing games like Zelda, for instance, I was playing Twilight Princess on this, and it translated very, very well. Like, it made sense to me. Like, oh, that's A. These are item buttons. This is inventory. Like, this is map. This is inventory. It took me a while to figure out how they mapped it, but it wasn't that unintuitive to me. And now the great thing about the nunchuck is that there are 2 back triggers here. There's a camera button, and there's a Z button here. I think that's absolutely great. This stick feels really good too. It's kind of mushy in the middle, but nice and snappy when you move it around. Again, holding this way lets you use the A and B buttons, the plus and minus buttons, and the 1 and 2 buttons are a little bit harder to get to if you need them, but I honestly never really used them that much. It's also super comfortable to hold. I'm not gonna lie. The nunchuck just melts right into your hand. When I'm playing this, I'm always, and I can just kind of lay back and hold it however I feel like it. Hell, if you were left-handed and wanted to hold it like this, you totally could. The point is that the flexibility of this controller is what I like about it. And you can just kind of flick this up and down to shake for motion accuracy. You can also use it as a pointer. So honestly, I think it's pretty cool. Wii Remote's probably my favorite controller. Sue me. And last but not least, we have Switch Joy-Cons, and I'm gonna keep this brief, but yes, holy shit. By the way, just like the GameCube controller, and I believe the Wii Remote, this has rumble. I really like the rumble on this. It feels good. Now, I will say, no back triggers here, which, again, whatever. Again, I'm putting these into a Joy-Con grip, using this as a traditional controller. You can also use them detached, kind of like the Wii Remote and nunchuck combo. But as a traditional controller, these little plus and minus buttons are so much fun to press. They don't feel weird. Now, I will say these shoulder buttons are not my favorite. They're kind of awkward. I'm not a fan of them. But the face buttons are nice and clicky again. They're kind of small, but they rest really naturally. Like, oh, it makes sense that Y is up there and B is down here. Like, that makes a lot of sense. Like, it never feels like it doesn't make sense. Home button's nice and out of the way, and then you have the right and left analog sticks. 2 analog sticks, finally. I will say, these are not my favorite analog sticks in the world. They're way better than the 3DS Circle Pad, which a lot of people said they were like 3DS Circle Pad, which had me worried. At least these are elevated, but they still feel pretty decent. And then these buttons, I know they're not D-pads, but they just feel good. Everything about this feels good, but honestly, if I had to go with one, I would probably say the Wii Remote and nunchuck. Closely followed by the GameCube, then the Switch Joy-Cons, then the N64, and then I'm really sorry, the Super Nintendo controller. I recognize what it did for the industry, but I can't say I enjoy playing it all that much today. So, anyway guys, that's my opinion on the controllers I happen to own. Thank you so much for watching the video. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.